A Missouri auditor took his own life following alleged political bullying and a whisper campaign pointing to anti-Semitism. Tom Schweik, he was running for governor of Missouri, and officials say that John Hancock, the newly elected chairman of Missouri's Republican Party, led a whisper campaign against Schweik, telling people that Schweik was in fact Jewish. Now, while Schweik was of Jewish heritage, he did not practice the faith. In fact, he lived his life as an Episcopalian and was open about his Christianity. Officials believe that the effort was a move to fend off the anti-Semitism or feed off of it that exists within parts of Missouri. Schweik was under political attack. Donors began pulling out from his campaign, and he ended up taking his own life by shooting himself at his home. When I first saw the story, I'm like, my God, what the hell's going on? And then I wonder, is this a lot more prevalent than I think? I know you've got family Montana and the rest. Does this happen in more places than we believe?
You don't have to go to Montana. It is prevalent. It is. It happens in Westchester, where you see the visible symbols, people painting swastikas, graveyard.
But is it a political non-starter in certain places?
Sure, it is. But then again, so is bias against other groups, other religions. It's not just Jews. It's everybody gets their turn. So,
but to the point, I'll show my naivete. But the idea that if you tell somebody, a donor, wait a minute, his grandfather was Jewish, I'm going to pull my money.
In one of the political parties, that may be more powerful, and in some states, it may be more powerful. Generally speaking, in New York, in the Democratic Party, you don't have to worry. In parts, it's there. It's just really there, and you can't prove it all the time. You can see it, you can sense it. You know, black folk go through the same stuff.
I was wondering why you were pointing at me.
Well, because I'm about to get to the Irish. The Irish had to go through it at some point. That stuff is still there in America.
Richard, it happens every day in politics. It's part, unfortunately, it's part of American politics. Whatever might be your weak point, whether you're perhaps gay, and even though that's changing, and not out of the closet, or in some cases Jewish. Remember Carl McCall, who ran for governor of New York? There were certain districts in upstate where he did not campaign for the Democratic nomination because they wanted voters just to see the sign and the last name McCall. So there are several weaknesses that every politician, and yes, I know you find it hard to believe. I believe that it's despicable, but there are some places with a mere mention that you might be Jewish is enough to end your campaign.
There's a healthy Jewish community in Montana. The rabbi who I had growing up was from Joplin, Missouri. Did I say Montana? I meant Missouri. And so I'm not convinced from what I've read that this was just out and out anti-Semitism. To my thought, it was more a reaction off the Christianist mentality that I think it takes to get elected in a lot of states, where you have to be tried and true Christian. And so I think that's the whisper campaign. It would have been, instead of the focus on Judaism, it would have been the focus on other. And frankly, I think that's something that we should be careful about in this country, because you exclude a lot of really capable people.
You're not saying that phenomenon doesn't exist for Jews in Missouri?
No, of course not. Of course it exists.
I'm sorry, Andrew once told me of a story in another market where someone once asked him, as a reporter in another market, if Jews had horns, right? I mean, but whisper campaigns, you've seen.
When I got my marriage license in Bozeman, Montana, the very sweet, lovely lady filling out the forms at the clerk's office looked at me and said, "What is your Christian name?" So a lot of it's unintentional. A lot of it is people of goodwill. Look, in some of those highly Protestant areas of states like Missouri and Montana, there's a hostility to Roman Catholics. So that such a thing happens shouldn't be a shock to anybody.
Right. I do respectfully take issue with saying that this is just a problem on the right. Although I think it's more problems with Israel and Israeli policies on the left than with Jews in particular. But this is such a sad story. I mean, this is just. I read a piece by John Danforth Quayle today, who he called just before he killed himself, and they were dear friends. And Danforth said, "Always do the right thing," and this guy was just apparently crushed by the inclination in politics to not always do the right thing from a lot of people. And I don't know what drove him to suicide. You never know what's in somebody's head or heart. You just don't know. But what an incredibly sad tale. And what an incredibly sad thing that being Jewish or having Jewish ancestry would be a negative.
And it was obviously something that he hid, or he tried to keep private here. He had real concerns about this, but it just seems on the surface of it, and you're right.
I think Richard graciously says that other groups go through it in parts of the country. I don't think other groups go through it as much as Jews do.
Now, we always talk about gridlock in Washington, and one of the main reasons for it is, you can argue, gerrymandering. That's the drawing of district lines to all but ensure that the candidate of both political parties, whichever one it is, though, in that particular area, wins in those district elections. And it happens a lot more than you think. The 4th district in Illinois, I want you to look at the shape of this thing here. It was drawn to include certain portions of Chicago and exclude others. Then there's the Texas 35th district, designed to include lots of Democrats in both Austin and San Antonio, even though the cities are 80 miles from each other. Now you'd say, who could conceive of this and why would you do it? Well, the more Democrats in that district, the fewer they are in other Republican districts, and it works on the other side too. Now moves like that are one reason that in 2012, Democratic congressional candidates received 1 million+ votes more than Republican candidates did, and yet the GOP won a 33-seat advantage in the House. Now, to try and stop gerrymandering, states like Arizona, California, they've installed independent citizen commissions to redraw district lines, taking that power away from the state lawmakers. But this week, Supreme Court heard arguments against the independent Arizona Commission and appeared ready to overturn their law, putting the power of gerrymandering back in the hands of politicians. Bill, the simple fact of the matter is most of these races are decided before they even start here. Certain people have next to no chance to win because it doesn't matter who the candidate is. If there's an R or a D, depending on the makeup of the district, you're sunk before you start.
Yeah, you get about 5 or 6% of the races are competitive. And you say, what's competitive this year? What are we going to work on? I mean, there's very few that are competitive. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it may be... I mean, I've always thought that at least keeping it in the political sphere keeps it honest, keeps it more honest, as ridiculous as that sounds.
You get lousy trade-offs, though. I mean, when New York lost 2 congressional seats in 2012, they specifically engineered it so that 1 Republican seat went away and 1 Democratic seat went away, so that all of the incumbents could keep their seats. And it just...
No, because it was politically balanced the way to do it. This is complicated stuff. There is a remedy. These are excessive examples. They ought to be changed. But there are 2 problems. In most of New York State, voters are one-party voters. If you're in Elmira, don't run as a Democrat. If you're in Jamaica, Queens, don't run as a Republican. I don't care what the shape of the district is. In other areas, some of them, and in the case of New York, where the state senate's so close, it mattered, the districts are weird. Sometimes that's a consequence of the Voting Rights Act, where we gerrymander for what we think is a good purpose. In the end, if you could impose standards, even on the state legislature, those standards could include compactness, and it could include a restriction, a limitation on partisanship, that is the percentage of voters. So there are things that can be done. Some of them should be, but this is a political matter.
And I'll just say, because we've got to go break,
process.
the benefit if you could have more competitive races would be there'd be much more of a need for the candidates of both parties here to not just play to one extreme and to actually get some stuff done here and to work across aisles. That would be one of the consequences. Easy to do? Absolutely not. But if we could ever get there, it's a benefit. All right, we're going to judge a quick break. When we come back, political families here. Could we actually see, whether it be Hillary or Jeb, running away from their last name at all? We'll talk about that after this.